4 gunmen have their weapons aimed at his head, but he looks at them like they're already dead. He calmly presses his watch and starts the timer. 9 seconds later, all 4 are down and only the boss is left crawling on the floor. He picks up a shotgun from the ground, then puts the boss down and watches him squirm across the floor. Dan taps the barrel on the ground, like he is cheering him on while the guy bleeds out. These men ruled the streets their whole lives, but now they're tasting real fear before hell. He grabs a set of car keys and heads outside, but finds the dead boss's grandson sitting in the car. Dan won't hurt a kid, so he tells him to stay put and turns to leave. Then he hears a gunshot behind him. The boy just shot him, and when Dan turns back with his gun raised, the kid runs. But Dan doesn't fire because he can't believe a child that young would pull the trigger. The bullet hit his back and damaged his organs, so he has to get off this island immediately. He barely makes it onto the last ferry, then collapses on the dock when he reaches land. He thought he'd die on that road, but a stranger driving by spots him and stops. The wound is too severe for a hospital run, so they take him to the town doctor's house. Dr. Enzo works for hours and barely saves his life, and when Dan finally wakes up, the doctor realizes this man he saved is healing way too fast to be an ordinary person. This is a quiet little town in Italy, and just like the doctor said, it is peaceful and welcoming. Even Dan, a total outsider, can feel the kindness everywhere he goes. But one day, while he is out walking, he sees the darkness hiding in plain sight. A biker gang is shaking down local shops, and their leader is inside the fish market beating the owner. Dan hears the screams, but forces himself not to get involved because he is just passing through. But then he turns around and memorizes every one of their faces. The shop owner steps outside, his face covered in bruises, but he nods at Dan to say he is okay. Dan nods back, but his eyes stay locked on the thugs because they're already on his list. They won't have much time left, and the gang leader feels Dan's stare but doesn't care. He is not worried because his half-brother Vincent runs the local branch of the Camorra crime family. The Camorra is one of Italy's biggest mafia organizations, and they're planning to take over the town. They say they're building a resort and casino, but nobody knows what they're really up to. When one man refused to sell his land, they hanged his disabled father. They did it to send a message and force everyone else to give up their property. Dan doesn't want to bring trouble to the doctor, so he decides to find a hotel. But when he reaches the town square, everyone's running toward the same place. The fish market is on fire, and the owner tries to run inside to save his life's work. His wife drops to her knees screaming, and Dan knows exactly who did this. He turns and sees the gang standing nearby, watching the fire and laughing. Meanwhile, the town cop, Ezio, pulls surveillance footage and finds the van used in the arson. He calls to run the plates, and that one phone call almost destroys his family. The next day, Ezio goes to pick up his daughter from school, but the teacher says a colleague already picked her up, and Ezio realizes something's very wrong. He sprints home and finds 2 thugs in his living room with his wife and daughter. He tries to save them, but someone cracks him over the head with a bat. The gang leader's name is Draven, Vincent's younger brother, and he is a complete animal. He came here because Ezio's been investigating the arson, so Draven beats him bloody. Then he grabs Ezio's daughter and tells him if he keeps digging, his family will pay the price. After they leave, Ezio goes to the doctor to patch his wounds, and Dan sees him there. The doctor tells Dan that Ezio was the stranger who saved him that night on the road. Now Dan can't walk away, and that evening while Ezio's family is eating dinner, the gang shows up again to cause trouble because the daytime threat was just a test. The real plan is to use Ezio's cop credentials to secure enough boats to smuggle drugs and contraband. The second he says it, the restaurant goes dead silent. Everyone's holding their breath, and Draven thinks he has won. But Dan, the stranger from out of town, is staring at him like he is already dead. Still, with all his guys around, Draven sits down across from him. As the mob boss's brother, he can't back down in front of his crew. He thought Dan would be easy, but he has no idea he just signed his own death warrant. He goes to flip him off but gets countered instantly. Uncle Dan locks onto a pressure point so hard Draven almost loses control of his bladder. Following Dan's orders, he kicks all his guys out and hands over his pistol. He barely avoids wetting himself and limps out of the restaurant in total humiliation. But he still doesn't learn his lesson and gathers his crew to go back for revenge. Before they can move, a van comes screaming in. After the crash, the unlucky guy is crushed between 2 vehicles and stops breathing. Draven freezes in shock, but it is too late. Dan walks up with a wine bottle. One swing, and the mustache guy is out cold. Draven flicks open his knife, but Dan just raises his hands and smiles. There is no contest. Dan twists Draven's arms backward, forcing the spring blade in his hand straight into Draven's own heart. Only in his last moment does Draven realize he picked the wrong fight, and Dan watches him die. Then he calmly walks off into the night, and the next day police swarm the scene. Looking at the bodies, they actually feel relieved. These scumbags finally finally got what they deserved, but they also know this is going to be a nightmare because the dead guy is mob boss Vincent's brother. The chief rushes to Vincent's house, where he is holding a memorial for his brother. The chief warns him not to act rashly. Their business comes first, and if things blow up, Interpol might get involved. But Vincent says if he lets his brother's murder slide, he is worthless. The chief's advice only makes him angrier. No killer found. And now you're telling me to let it go. Vincent gets so mad, he stabs a knife straight through the chief's palm. Then he pins the hand down, pulls out another blade, and slices the whole thing off without anesthesia. He tells him to take his severed hand to the ER, maybe they can reattach it. And meanwhile, Uncle Dan has checked into a motel and contacts his CIA handler Peter through an encrypted line. He gives Peter the coordinates of the compound he hit at the start and hangs up. Peter traces the location, mobilizes a team, and when they raid the site, everyone is stunned. They seize hundreds of kilos of pills, 100 million in cash, and even more shocking, the medical examiner finds that all 25 bodies were killed by the same person using the same method. Peter quickly traces the lead back to Uncle Dan, which is exactly what Dan wanted. He has already done his homework on Vincent, who hides behind an island development project, but is really running drugs and funneling the profits to terrorist groups. And Dan's goal is simple: use the CIA to tear this cancer out by the roots. And based on Dan's intel, Peter deploys special forces to raid Vincent's biggest drug lab, shooting anyone who resists. The operation is fast and decisive. They arrest key members and haul away a fortune in dirty money. But then Peter gets a call from Dan warning him to be extremely careful. Vincent has been running this island town for years and is no small-time player. And the moment he hangs up, a bomb goes off. The explosion causes multiple casualties, and Peter is rushed to the hospital. He underestimated Vincent's brutality. But the worst is yet to come, because to find his brother's killer, Vincent and his crew kidnap Ezio and his family and drag them to the town square, demanding the townspeople hand over the killer. If anyone is hiding him, Vincent will execute Ezio's entire family and then every last resident. When no one steps forward, Vincent fires a shot right past Ezio's ear. Ezio collapses in agony, and Vincent says the next bullet goes through his skull. But then, Uncle Dan steps out with 2 guns drawn to save the man who saved his life, and all the innocent people there. Dan chooses to lower his guns, but Vincent sees his brother's killer standing right there and aims straight at Dan's head. His thumb presses down on the hammer. At the last second, the honest old doctor fires first, and his example inspires the others. The townspeople who've been terrorized by the cartel for years finally stand up and turn their phone cameras on Vincent. They're recording everything, and the CIA is minutes away from arriving. Even though he is furious, Vincent has no choice. He has to back down for now, but before he leaves, he screams that he'll be back to finish this. The crowd boos him off as he and his crew drive away. Coming back to settle the score is a fantasy now, because Dan won't give him a second chance. Back at his compound, Vincent explodes in rage. He orders his men to bring out the heavy weapons at dawn and level the entire town, but he has no idea. Justice is already here. The guy on night watch just wants to light a cigarette and stay awake. Turns out smoking really is bad for your health. Dan slips into the mansion like a ghost. The patrol guards don't see a thing before a bullet punches through them. Upstairs, 3 guys are playing poker. The power cuts out, so one of them steps onto the balcony to check. He sees nothing wrong outside and starts to turn back. Death arrives in an instant. Dan moves through the house, avoiding every camera, and picks up a fireplace poker along the way. The security guy watching the monitors suddenly feels a chill. He glances at the screen and sees a shadow behind him. Before he can scream, the poker drives through his throat. His partner notices something's wrong and sees him choking. She is terrified. She won't make it in time to help, but Dan's thoughtful enough to take care of her too. He wraps a wire around her neck so the 2 of them can reunite in the afterlife. Meanwhile, Vincent's asleep upstairs. He feels something wet on his face, looks over, and sees his pillow is soaked. He sniffs it and realizes something's very wrong. But the second he looks up, one of his most trusted men is hanging from the ceiling. Vincent panics and grabs a submachine gun. He yells out every one of his crew's names, but no one answers. The silence is deafening. Even when glass cuts into his foot, it doesn't compare to the terror. He finally builds up the courage to go downstairs. All his men are sitting there with their eyes closed, clearly knocked out. His usual arrogance is completely gone. The fear drives him insane, and he fires wildly into the air. Then he turns around and gets punched in the face. When he comes to, he is tied to a pillar, and his stomach is pumped full of the drugs he loves selling to other people. Selling to other people. Dan doesn't say a word, he just unties him. Vincent has no idea what is happening, but survival instinct kicks in. He drags himself toward the exit, while Dan follows slowly behind like the angel of death. Dan's giving him a few final minutes to understand what real desperation feels like. The overdose hits Vincent hard. Every step is agony. He is desperate for someone to save him, but a monster like him doesn't deserve mercy. The man who once ruled this town like a tyrant probably never imagined he'd end up crawling on the ground like a dog. The drugs finish him off. Vincent can't move another inch and dies in the cold mud, covered in his own sins. By chance, the town is holding a festival at that exact moment, and the fireworks exploding overhead feel like a celebration. Interpol dismantles Vincent's entire operation. Everyone connected to him gets arrested. It is finally over. Dan visits PETA in the hospital and explains the whole story from the beginning. Turns out he only took down the cartel to help a referee named Dale get back his life savings. The cartel had stolen $360,000 from him. Dan only met Dale once, but he couldn't stand seeing a good man get robbed. As for why he came to this town, he blames himself for having a soft spot and getting tricked by a kid. Before leaving, he gives PETA the backpack with Dale's money. PETA tracks down Dale's house and hands it over. Getting his savings back means the old couple can finally stop worrying about their future. 将背包原封不动地交给了老人失而复得的毕生积蓄，让老夫妻俩终于不用